Hello and welcome to WION Live broadcast from New York City. I'm Susan Tehrani. First, a look at this hour's top headlines. French President Emmanuel Macron faces mounting pressure after violent demonstrations that left more than 400 security forces injured and the center of major cities shrouded in tear gas and smoke. Meanwhile, France joins the fast-growing list of nations to ban TikTok on phones of public servants. Hundreds of protesters rally outside Downing Street in central London, heckling the arrival of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for a meeting with his British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. U.S. and South Korean militaries conduct air drills as part of a joint field training exercise called Warrior Shield, using various types of missiles and bombs which struck various targets along the Korean peninsula. India's opposition Congress party suffers a major blow as parliament disqualifies its leader, Rahul Gandhi, a day after a court convicted him of defamation for insulting comments aimed at insulting to the Prime Minister. Deutsche Bank shares drops more than 13% as the cost of insurance against the risk of default surge, fueling fears about a banking sector crisis. Pentagon leaders defended the highest ever military budget, citing China and other eventualities that call for preparedness. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin made their case for higher military expenditures during their testimony before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. They defended Pentagon's record $842 billion budget request by pointing to hotspots of conflict and tension.
In order to protect the American people, readiness now and readiness in the future through modernization is our number one priority, and there is no other number one.
Austin asserted that the U.S. is at its highest state of readiness with capabilities to be deployed within days if needed.
This budget sustains our current readiness and adapts the joint force to the future warfighting requirements. This is a matter of significant national security importance, and we must act with clear-eyed urgency. By doing so, no adversary should ever underestimate the resolve of our nation and the strength of our military. Preparation for war and deterring war is extraordinarily expensive, but it's not as expensive as fighting a war. And this budget prevents war and prepares us to fight it if necessary.
The testimony comes soon after Chinese leader Xi Jinping visit to Moscow for a summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Biden administration has labeled Beijing as a pacing challenge that holds the potential to reshape the international order. The U.S. is reinforcing its military ties with Australia and Japan and holding joint military drills with South Korea with an eye on Seoul's northern neighbors.
This is a strategy-driven budget and one driven by the seriousness of our strategic competition with the People's Republic of China.
Earlier, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken at a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing said that the budget contains both discretionary and mandatory proposals for new innovative investments to outcompete China.
President's FY24 budget requests for the State Department and USAID meet this moment head on. The budget will sustain our security, economic, energy, and humanitarian support for Ukraine to ensure that President Putin's war remains a strategic failure. The budget will also strengthen our efforts to outcompete the PRC.
Blinken added that the budget will help the U.S. push back on advancing authoritarianism and also strengthening democracies around the world. For more on this, we are joined by retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. He's a senior fellow at the Military Expert for Defense Priorities. He's also a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel with 21 years of service, including 4 combat deployments. So we take his analysis very seriously. Thank you for your service and for joining us live from Virginia. Colonel, what do you make of all of this and this latest news? It seems that the United States is working around the clock to outcompete China for the most part.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, I'm a little concerned with how we're going about some of this, because the whole idea is supposed to be the defense of the United States national security interests worldwide. But it seems that we spend way more focus on projecting power, especially into the areas around China, than we do with diplomacy. And it doesn't take much comparison to look at our diplomatic budget and the military budget, and they're vastly out of proportion. And I think we should be putting a lot more emphasis on the diplomatic arena, because that's the best place where you can get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, and the most security. And, and things like what happened with China here just in the last 2 days, yesterday and today, with this freedom of navigation operations in the U.S. guided missile destroyer into the area around where China claims its sovereignty over some islands. Now, there's plenty of dispute over that, and that's something many other countries actually also dispute. But you have to ask the question, how does this advance American national security or those of our allies when we constantly send these ships into close proximity with the PLA warships and airplanes? And I argue that that's not necessarily a good thing for us to do on a routine basis.
And Colonel, what steps should the United States be taking right now? It seems that there is no appetite for de-escalation. We're talking about China right now, but then you look at the war in Ukraine and relations with Russia as well. It just doesn't seem like there's an appetite for de-escalation in any of these regions right now when it comes to the foreign policy agenda of the Biden administration, at least, and many on Capitol Hill, even some Republicans. Yeah,
you're 100% right. There's no question about that. And in both of those two theaters you just mentioned there, both the Indo-Pacific and in the European theater around the Russia-Ukraine war, really the only thing we've been doing is to, quote, show strength. And look, there's a time for strength. I mean, I as you pointed out, I served 21 years in the service. I've fought in 4 separate combat environments, and I'm the first one that'll tell you that we need to have a strong military, and we need to be ready to use it to decisive effect. However, there is a time and a place for it, and the priority should be using diplomacy and seeking to de-escalate. We should not be just blanket sending weapons and ammunition and money to Ukraine to keep that war going. We should be looking for ways to end the war, end the suffering. Similarly, in the Pacific area, we should be doing far more to try to engage China on a diplomatic front to try to resolve some of these difficulties and some of these challenges that we have, as opposed to expressly, for example, in the Philippines, accounting for 4 additional bases, military bases we can use, expanding military operations on Guam, expanding military cooperation with Japan in some of those areas here. Of course, China regards all that as a threat, and then they also ratchet up their military activities, and then they expand their military capacity. So you have both sides trying to one up the other, and that doesn't lead anywhere good, and it certainly doesn't provide security for anyone.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us on WION, and we look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
North Korea claims to have tested a new nuclear-capable underwater attack drone. The state media said that the drone is capable of generating a radioactive tsunami. Pyongyang blamed the joint military drills by Seoul and Washington for raising tensions in the region. The test was overseen by North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un. The new drone cruised at a depth of 80 to 100 meters underwater during the test. This is according to state-run media. It's called High-Il, which means tsunami. It traveled for over 59 hours before detonating inside the water. According to reports, the drone can be deployed at any coast and port. The new drone was developed to make sneak attacks in enemy waters. It can destroy naval striker groups and major operational ports by making a radioactive wave triggered by an underwater explosion. A day before the drone testing, North Korea fired cruise missiles. The cruise missiles firing was a way to practice carrying out tactical nuclear attack missions. Pyongyang has increased its military tests in recent weeks. It fired an intercontinental ballistic missile last week as well. North Korea's launches come amid U.S. and South Korea carrying out military drills themselves. On Thursday, the two allies completed their largest joint military drills in 5 years. The United States military has carried out multiple strikes in Syria, which has killed 11 pro-Iran fighters. The strike was against groups aligned with Iran, who the U.S. blames for killing an American contractor and injuring 6 others. Earlier, a drone attack killed an American contractor at a coalition base in northeast Syria. That was on Thursday. According to U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the retaliatory strikes were carried out at the direction of President Joe Biden. According to the Pentagon, the targeted facilities were used by groups affiliated with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. And the U.S. identified that the drone used to kill the contractor was of Iranian origin. According to reports, Iran-backed groups stationed near the city of Al-Mayadeen also fired 3 missiles near a U.S. base, out of which 2 missiles fell in Syria's largest oil field, Al-Omar. Al-Omar also houses a U.S. base, while the third landed on a civilian house nearby. According to the U.S. military, U.S. troops have come under attack by Iranian-backed groups about 78 times since 2021. The attack came just weeks after top U.S. General Mark Milley's visit to northeastern Syria. Milley's visit was to assess the mission against Islamic State and the risk to U.S. personnel, where he reiterated that the deployment of roughly 900 U.S. troops to Syria is worth the risk. Banking sector worries weigh on global stocks, and investors avoided risky assets once again. A European sub-index of bank shares fell by 6.5% on Friday and is on track to fall for a third consecutive week. Banking shares have fluctuated dramatically this week as traders debate whether a forced tie-up between Credit Suisse and UBS was a sign of stability or a systematic stress. For now, though, it looks more like a contingent and a financial crisis in the making. Deutsche Bank stock dropped 13%. The German lender's shares slumped for the third day. That's a third day in a row, and have now lost more than a fifth of their value so far this month. That drop in Deutsche's share was driven by the bank's report, which showed that insurance costs to protect investors against the risk of its default rose sharply. Deutsche Bank's credit default swaps CDS, which measures the price of insurance against the risk of failure on debt, hit a 4-year high. The German lender also said that it planned to redeem $1.5 billion of less secure debt that isn't due to be repaid until 2028. Deutsche Bank's plan to access less secure capital or Tier 2 debt shows just how fragile sentiment still is. The recent banking turmoil in the U.S. and Europe has brought back memories of the 2008 global financial crisis. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has tried to calm investor fears about the stability of banks. She also warned about the possible effects of the economy of a lending crunch if people move their money out of smaller banks. Yellen changed her mind on Thursday, however, and promised to take more steps to protect bank deposits. Earlier, she had said that blanket insurance was unlikely. What also exacerbated investors' worries about a contingent was the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision to hike rates on Wednesday. The U.S. Central Bank, though, signaled a more cautious approach going forward because of pressures in the financial system. Still, markets are betting on a U.S. recession and incoming rate cuts.
To a range of 2% to 2.25%.
Former U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Paul Volcker slayed inflation. Ben Bernanke saved the banks. Can current chief Jerome Powell do both? Well, that is the need of the hour, according to many. The current banking crisis threatens financial stability while inflation threatens to push ahead. And that is not restricted to the confines of the U.S., but risks spreading beyond its borders.
At first glance, the Fed, under Powell's leadership and other major central banks, continued this week with the same policy that they've had in place for the past year, which is to raise interest rates to bring down inflation. In reality, however, everything is different now that a series of bank failures has sent tremors through global financial markets. Threats to financial stability were not even on the radar of central bankers until recently. Now they're shooting for the stars. To hear Powell and his colleagues tell it, avoiding another round of inflation like the one experienced in the 1970s is still job one. But the signal is shifting. That is warranting a policy similar to what Ben Bernanke used during and post the global financial crisis. Bernanke fought off the 2008 crisis by adopting unprecedented methods, including doling out free cash to banks, literally. After Silicon Valley Bank failed and Credit Suisse had taken over by a shotgun marriage, the Fed only raised interest rates by half as much as was anticipated. The European Central Bank and the Swiss National Bank hiked as expected, but they refrained from providing any forward guidance. The recent wild swings and market bets on policy show that investors, too, are having a hard time figuring this out. After SVB's failure, they shifted from pricing in an aggressive Fed that hikes several more times to pricing in a "we're all doomed" scenario of imminent rate cuts, and are only now slightly less pessimistic. Analysts say the core dilemma for policymakers is that prescriptions for controlling prices and boosting banks point in opposite directions. To get inflation down, central banks jack up rates. They give money to struggling lenders and lower the cost of borrowing to avert crisis. And the danger is that they end up with the worst of both worlds. A full-blown crisis that triggers a recession. Then that would force central banks to give up the fight against inflation before it is over. So what remains to be seen is, have the predictions now turned for the worse or the better? A softer tone or an aggressive one will define the path the world's largest economy takes.
Two-time world champions France will begin a new era under their new skipper, Kylian Mbappe, when they host the Netherlands at the Stade de France later today in a Group B encounter of the 2024 European Championship qualifiers. The 2022 Qatar World Cup Golden Boot winner was officially named the new captain of the French football team on Tuesday. He is one of the first names in the France playing 11 and has been their undisputed superstar ever since he broke into Didier Deschamps' squad in the March of 2017 as an 18-year-old. His leadership qualifies were on display during the Qatar World Cup final, where he carried the French team on his own. That and age on his side helped convince the French head coach to hand him over the armband.
I don't think I'm going to change, first of all, but I think that I have a word that is listened to in the dressing room. It's just a matter of taking it in the right way and knowing how to use that word in the best way. As I said, the best way is to think of the collective, to always try to bring the others into the game and show that there is no gap between me and my teammates, that we are united.
France ranked third in the world behind Brazil and Argentina and has not won the European Championship since the year 2000, but they boast a strong record in qualifying as they have only lost one of their last 19 such matches. A run of 5 wins in their last 6 meetings against the Oranje also bodes well ahead of Friday's contest. But before thinking about their opponents, Mbappe and Deschamps need to iron out possible ego issues that may affect them in the long run. Ronald Koeman is back in the Netherlands dugout following Louis van Gaal's retirement after Qatar 2022. In his first spell between February 2018 and August 2022, he oversaw 11 wins in 20 matches. Koeman has vowed to implement an attractive and attacking brand of football and will also be hoping to resurrect his own managerial career after a disastrous 14-month stint in charge of Barcelona. Actors Chris Pine, Regina Page, and Michelle Rodriguez led a host of stars on a wet Dungeon and Dragon honor Among Thieves red carpet in London. More details in our next report. Thank you so much for staying with us and watching WION Live broadcast from New York City. I'm Susan Tehrani. I'll see you on Monday, but don't go away. More news and headlines coming up next, only on WION World is One.
There are many other